Hello everyone, I am Henrik and with me I have
Elaine.
and welcome to all of you to today's event and especially welcome to all of you joining this event live here now with us from all over the world. It's an international audience and it is an international subject that we're going to discuss today. So looking back at the last year, it's been a year to remember. Most of us will remember COVID and all the challenges it has brought to us. But of course, there's also been some light in the tunnel. And one of them is, of course, sustainability, where we feel today that there is a completely different willingness to actually talk about sustainability, address it, and act on sustainability. And that we feel is something that we need to take the opportunity to make sure that when we restart our economy, when we restart the society, that we build back in a better way. And this is not that easy, of course. Many of you listening in today, you are corporate business leaders, and you know that things are moving fast. At the same time, the pressure around sustainability, but also the opportunity around sustainability is coming at you at a completely different pace. So how do you take care of this opportunity that is being presented to you? And the book that Elaine and I has written about sustainability leadership is actually addressing that. It's a handbook and is giving you guidance regardless of where you are on that journey in sustainability. And it's all about transforming your company, your industry, or the world. And actually today we have with us a number of speakers who are doing exactly that. They are going in with that ambition and actually transforming in all of these aspects. And even if the book that we wrote originally had a focus on good examples from Sweden and from Scandinavia, it's clear that today we are broadening that scope, Elaine, and we're starting to look a little bit more international as well.
Right. So today was all about taking the conversation more global. And we wanted to look at how we could bring some of the key concepts from our book and bring them into, other parts of the world. As Henrik said, we initially focused on Sweden. And there's a lot happening this week. It's actually a very exciting week. We have Biden having his first climate summit. We have Earth Day reminding us all how important nature is in the planet that we're living on. And in this context, we thought in this discussion, we're not going into so much why sustainability is important. We're all seeing that growing awareness of sustainability, but we want to focus a bit on how. What can you do if you're a business leader and you want to increase your sustainability ambition? So we introduce a few concepts in our book. One is a roadmap or a model, a stepwise model. We're not going to go into all the details today, but we also have a couple of what we call powerful accelerators. So digitalization and technology, for example, is a great accelerator if it's applied right in the sustainability agenda. And we also look at how can we get more exponential impact from the activities that we undertake. So that's what we'll talk about today. Throughout the book and throughout the event, you can use the hashtag Sustainability Leadership Book. Now I'll turn over to Henrik to introduce our first speaker.
Yeah, this event, of course, takes the opportunity now to look at approaches more on an international basis, but of course it's about international transformation agenda, and it's about leadership at the end of the day. And we are delighted, we are super excited actually that we have one of the sustainability superstars with us today, and that is Jeffrey Sachs, who is the director of the Center of Sustainable Development at Columbia University. We have met a number of times, and I think a role model and always a very clear thinker about both the opportunities, of course, but also the challenges that we see in the private sector of sustainable leadership, but also the policy transformations that are needed. So a very special welcome to you, Jeff, and maybe to kick us off immediately. I mean, we are 10 years remaining on the 2030 agenda. What's really at stake here, Jeff?
think you're muted.
Yes. Oh my God. That's amazing. Wait a minute. Into this and still speaking on mute. Henrik and Elaine, thank you so much for your leadership. The Swedes got to this faster than anybody else. As you know, we're nearly the 50th anniversary of Sweden hosting the first conference on this topic, which took place in 1972. Sweden adopted a carbon tax 31 years ago, so you're way ahead of the curve. But the world is catching up, and as Henrik, as you said, the world's catching up for two reasons. One, the pressures really are growing. The risks are manifold. The urgency is apparent even to the most dim-witted, I would say, of parts of our world today. But the opportunities are also remarkably expanding, and that's what's exciting. The technological advances have come so dramatically. The breakthroughs in both green and digital technologies every day are mind-blowing. We not only have the urgency to address the sustainable development challenge, but we have unprecedented powerful opportunities, and the business sector is playing a tremendously dynamic role. Even if a few parts of the business sector are still dragging their feet, the ones that are making money, the ones that are building new markets, the ones that see stock market capitalization soaring are the front runners, not the laggards. And I think that this is a very basic and exciting point. You know, when it comes to the 2030 goals, which are fundamental for a fair world and a safe world, we're, of course, way off course, as we are for the 2050 Paris Agreement goal of remaining below 1.5 degrees Celsius. We're already at 1.2 degrees Celsius warming of the planet. The planet's warming between 0.2 and 0.3 degrees C every decade. In other words, we're at the end of the story. If we're going to meet these goals, we need to act dramatically. But then the possibility of accelerated action is also astounding. So we're not at the end of our potential to achieve the goals. We just have to move quickly. And I'm happy to say we got rid of a nutcase president and have a president that understands what this issue is about and is putting trillions of dollars behind this now. That's important. We're in the trillions. The bill in front of Congress right now, the proposals are $2.3 trillion, and that's a down payment, as the cabinet in the United States is saying. And despite all the bickering between the US and China, which I'm not too happy about because it's unnecessary, Secretary Kerry and the Chinese leaders agreed last weekend on cooperation on the road forward of the two countries. That means that the European Union, the United States, China, Japan, Korea, UK, and dozens of other countries around the world are on course for a trajectory to reach net zero by 2050, at least to set that goal. So, Henrik, as you have shown at Scania so brilliantly, the technologies exist to do this, ingenious technologies. You were the one that showed me the picture of the catenary lines, how we're going to electrify the large-scale trucking, which was a puzzle for me till you explained to me how many options that we have. And I know you're making breakthroughs in other sectors as well. I would say, just having gone through a deep dive on US possibilities in something we call ZCAP, the Zero Carbon Action Plan, an initiative of universities across the United States, we have the technological means for a green and digital fast forward. And that's what we should be aiming for, green and digital in transport, in buildings, in industry, in new ways, in power generation. and in using digital services to expand tremendously the reach of healthcare, of education, of finance, of banking, of public services, of environmental monitoring and management, of precision agriculture. We have tremendous technological potential. That's where the money's going to go. That's where the smart business leadership is going to take us. And I think we can be quite optimistic about this, even in this really disrupted and awful period of the pandemic. We can see that technology and science is helping. We got to get our own act together as human beings, but even that, I think, is on the way now. So I'm optimistic, but want to underscore, Henrik, what you said. The situation is a high pressure, urgent situation, but the opportunities are unprecedented. Thank you for inviting me to be part of today's very exciting session. No. I think you're on mute.
Can you unmute me, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You hear me now?
Yes.
I think so. Okay. Sorry about that. I just wanted to quickly I know you have to drop off, but before you do, circling back to President Biden's Leaders Summit taking place this week, what would be your advice? I mean, there's many companies now engaging on sustainability. How can that engagement best happen? How can leaders engage the private sector and vice versa?
I think we need this very intense discussion two ways on how we're going to get to zero by 2050. This seems to me to be the overarching aim for Glasgow, COP26 in November, that all countries come with a zero by 2050 plan of action. In other words, a pathway on how this is going to be done. And as we've discussed, as I just mentioned with trucking, but is true in other sectors as well, there's a lot that's known about, I'd say 70 or 80% of the puzzle, but there are some hard sectors, whether it's large transport, whether it's some of the heavy industry, metallurgy, and so on, that where the dialogue between industry and government is extremely important, so that we set pathways across the board. I would also add land use as extremely important, because we need some significant changes in agricultural practices, some new ecological boundaries for carbon storage and biodiversity conservation. And this is where a real dialogue on the technological options and on the public-private interface is extremely important. But it should all be around the practical goal that the entire world will get to net zero by mid-century at the latest.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's great to see you again, and thanks for taking the time. I know you have a very busy agenda. Thanks for joining us today.
Okay, thank you.
Well, pleasure, and thanks. I see so many leaders on the screen, so hello to a lot of friends, and great to be with you today.
Great.
Thank you.
So with those words on opportunities, the possibilities for technology breakthroughs, and the emphasis on this really being time for accelerated action, we're going to move over and hear from some of our other speakers today. We have 3 speakers coming up now, all that have unique perspectives on how they are transforming their companies, their industries, and even the world. We'll be joined by Nicholas Lefebvre-Martin, who's the Managing Director of the Middle East, Africa, and India for NG Impact, and he'll tell us about his transformation journey of his company. We have Neil Dunn, who's the CEO of Polymateria, a man on a mission to disrupt the plastics industry. And we have Franny Lautier, who's the CEO of Southbridge Investment Group, an investor concerned with bringing sustainable principles to the African continent, into the African business world. So with that, I'll hand over to Henrik to start the first segment.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. So I will start with Nicholas then, and Nicholas, you're looking after the whole EMEA and basically half the planet here, working at Engie, a company that I know well, that has gone through, I think, amazing transformation when it comes to sustainability over the last few years, and I know that you've been instrumental in that. But it's also been a transformation with technology at its center. Can you tell us briefly, Nicholas, about that transformation that you have done in your company?
Yeah, with pleasure. Thanks very much for inviting me. So I work for Engie Impact, part of the broader Engie group, as you mentioned, which Engie itself has gone through an important shift over the past few years. Really, it started probably 5 to 6 years ago, I would say, with two major decisions. The first one was not really a technology decision. It was just a choice to get out of coal. As a large independent power producer, coal played an important role. So that was a critical decision, which was, in hindsight, an obvious one to make, but a hard one at the time. So getting out of coal was obviously a big one. Other one was to double down on renewable energy. And I should add a third one, which to continue to be at the heart of our clients' energy concerns. So really the mixture of these really helped put us on the right path. Just to give you a sense, there was a 59% greenhouse gas reduction since 2016 already. So that's already been banked. We're going to complete this coal phase out by 2025 in Europe, 2027 in the rest of the world. It's a hard and tedious process. Currently, about a third of our installed capacity is renewable energy. That will shift to about close to 60% of our installed capacity will be renewables in 2030. We're obviously taking SBT engagements, which has pretty robust targets for both thermal generation activities, but also all of the energy sales that have to fuel the plants and the networks around the world. So both of these were under SBT trajectories, so pretty robust reductions over the next decade. But probably most important of all is that we've taken Engie has really evolved its purpose and put the energy transition at the heart of everything it does. And last year, the board acted on a purpose statement, which I'll read to you, which I think is so important, is to act to accelerate the transition towards a carbon neutral economy through reduced energy consumption and more environmentally friendly solutions. So this is the core, the purpose statement of Engie, and it's really acting as our guiding light for everything we do, both for our own assets, but also for all of the energy assets and services we do for our clients.
Okay. An amazing journey, and I like that purpose statement. I think that if you anchor your sustainability journey in a well-defined purpose that addresses both the society but also the planet, which it sounds like you have done, that's the road to success. But Nicholas, also, energy impact. Tell us about that more in detail, because that sounds very interesting. Like a tool to both transform yourself, but also other companies and other sectors.
That's correct. So Engie Impact, which is the company I work in, was created around in 2019 as a separate advisory and implementation partner company for the large complex companies, cities, municipalities around the world, with the intent to partner in accelerating this transition towards a low carbon net zero future. And really it was with recognizing the fact, as Jeff mentioned, the technological solutions for a lot of the challenges that we have are actually well known. What really is the bottleneck is the decision making that leaders in these large complex companies have to make, the capital they have to mobilize to put their industries and their companies on a path to accelerated decarbonization. So it's really before implementation that companies often need support. So we come with both advisory, engineering, digital, financial support to help make these decisions and put companies on a path towards decarbonization. So it's really helping with things such as road mapping, opportunity identification, detailed studies, and financing plans and support, and also providing digital assets to help them monitor and really understand the specific needs of their industries.
How important would you say, you mentioned in digital here, I mean, how important is digital and AI and sort of in this transformation when you look at those clients, those customers, and what is the success rate on that? Because it's easy to talk about it, but it's more difficult to deliver on those results.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe before answering your question specifically, it's worth to put the digital question of sustainability in context. There are still today companies where you literally have 2 to 5 people who every yearly report that they have to do, their footprint. They go in a black box and crunch the numbers with their Excel tables and so on. It's pretty backwards when you think about it as where we are on the finance accounting measures and practices. So the sustainability realm actually comes from quite a way back when you compare it to finance. So there's this gap to bring it back to and start making sustainability data and information a real management tools, equipping leaders to be able to lead. Because right now, a lot of them are operating in the dark. They don't have the detailed, almost real-time data on their carbon footprint, let alone water and other aspects. So I think there's still a lot to do on that front, but it's an area where a lot of companies are investing in. Engie itself has made significant investments over the past 7 years, actually, around artificial intelligence, around digital tooling to help our clients have that information to make the right decisions. And this takes a number of different forms. When it comes to scope 1 and 2, so your own more direct emissions, that's the scope 1 plus all the energy consumption. Typically, there's a better handle around these, and we have optimization tools which are run to find new saving opportunities, whether it be around renewable energy, whether it be around on-site, whether it be around industrial efficiency. So I think in that realm, there's progress that we've caught up pretty well. I think the next frontier from a digital tooling perspective is really around scope 3. So really supply chain emissions and understanding really your footprint beyond your own footprint and your own direct assets. And that's where we're at Engie investing quite heavily to develop these new tools in order to do just that. So to provide our companies, our clients with that visibility, to give them the means to manage this properly.
I recognize that, Nicholas, I think from Scania, my own company there, on sort of the scope 3, upstream scope 3, especially when it comes to, in our industry, 95% of the CO2 emission comes from the vehicles when they're out on the road, only 5% when we build them. But we need to address those 5% as well, especially with electrical vehicles, with batteries and so on. And there you're right, if you can use digitalization there in that supply chain, first, second, third tier, is the way forward. I'll probably come back to you on needing some help on that. So thank you for a great contribution, Nicholas, and I think showing a great example of how you can transform your company and actually other companies as well, even cities, as we heard. So great learnings from you there, Nicholas.
Great. So with that, we're going to go over to the next speaker. I'd like to bring Neil back up. And from the go, Polymatera set out to transform the plastics industry. You and I have known each other for several years now, and I remember having a conversation with you at the World Economic Forum, 5 or 6 years ago, and you said, I'm leaving telecom, as did I, and you were going to do this, what you thought then was this crazy startup. Well, it's not so crazy anymore, and we want to hear about it. And before we go into the details, I thought, could you start and just help for the audience and for all the speakers here to just contextualize a little bit, what is the plastics problem today? What are we facing when it comes to plastics and sustainability? Just to get sort of the broader context before we come into your company.
Yeah, thanks very much, Elaine. And I'll pick up actually on some of the points Nicholas raised just around the need to be data-driven and science-based as you develop any disruptive technology on some of these big global issues. But just in terms of the background on the issue itself, so of the 316 million tons of plastic that were produced 4 years ago in the world, 40% of that goes to landfill. So landfill is the cheapest end of life solution. It's basically storing up the problem for later generations. 32% winds up in the natural environment. So if you extrapolate forward, you wind up with 4 billion tons of plastic in the natural environment by the year 2050. 14% goes to waste to energy programs. So that's incinerated and converted into some form of energy. And then of the 14% we're claiming as recycling, are recycled, only really 2% of that is what we call truly circular. So that's PET, polyesters, your drinks bottles, and your high density polyethylene going into a circular loop. So all to say, we have a very long way to go in terms of actually developing solutions to what will, by the year 2050, be a 4 billion ton problem.
And I know, having, been looking at this myself for many years, there are, chemical recycling, there's different recycling approaches that are out there today. Are they working, or are you, your idea is we just have to rethink the whole thing. Could you?
Yeah, I think, like climate change, maybe for the Copenhagen summit back in, 2009, innovation is in its infancy on this particular issue. I remember going to Copenhagen, and we didn't have Tesla, we didn't have all the incredible work that the likes of Scania has done on, as Jeff was saying, on the fleet automation. We were pointing at innovation like Shia Gassi's Project Better Place. Not to say that that wasn't an incredible innovation at its time, but it wasn't systematic enough, and it wasn't easy enough to democratize. And when you dial forward a few more years to Paris in 2015, we had a much better handle on what the markets needed to do, what cheap solar out of China was able to do, what our industry back then, Elaine, communications technology was able to do to automate our lifestyles and our way of living and allow us to live within our one planet boundaries. So plastic pollution is effectively where climate was about 10 years ago. But as Jeff was saying in his introduction, the pace of change of innovation is something we're consistently underestimating on these big global issues. And that's where polymateria comes in.
And you are, as we said, on this mission to change the industry. Can you talk a bit about how you started the company and how you're going to do that? I know you focused a lot on standards and those kinds of things. Can you talk about what your approach has been? Yeah,
so our founders, had this idea about 6 years ago, and they had been approached as investors for various, solutions that were claiming to be effective in this space. And what they saw was a group of technologies that were claiming biodegradation, but really just physically fracturing plastic. So taking plastic and making microplastic, not very credible. There was also a group of technologies claiming biodegradation, a lot more credibility, but you needed specific end-of-life solutions like industrial composting in order for those materials to be able to biodegrade. So there was quite a gap in the landscape, just going back to Nicholas's introduction on when you unpack the 32% of plastic that winds up in nature, 31% are polyolefins. So this is polypropylene, polyethylene. To me and you, it's our, crisp packets, bags that you bring your shopping home in, those types of materials. They're actually incredibly pure materials, but no one had figured out how to get it back to nature before we came along, and also in a way of kind of time controlling it. So if recycling is the aspiration, if you want to give that every chance to happen, time controlling a technology to the exact month to allow for reuse, if that's an option, to allow for recycling. But then as and when if it winds up in the natural environment, that you would be able to get it back to nature and be perishable, just like any other bio-based material. So when this business was set up by our founders, we really looked at the state of plastic pollution in the world. And in terms of being mission driven, we went after polyolefins first and on land. Now, this sounds a little bit counterintuitive because all the media focus at the moment is on the oceans. But when you dig into that problem, you realize that 80% of all plastic that winds up in the marine environment comes from land. So our theory of change is stop polyolefins on land, get them back to nature, and you don't have such a big problem in the oceans. In terms of not being enough to be a disruptive technology and having to disrupt the system around you, some of the things that we've had to do in order to give confidence back to industry and also legislators are similar to what Tesla and others have done, open sourcing our IP. So sharing how do we scientifically prove biodegradation without creation of microplastic, without harm to the natural environment. And also it's not just what happens in a lab, it's also reflective of, what's happening outside, here today in Buckinghamshire. And you have rigorous pass-fail criteria from a scientific perspective that can back off all of those claims. That sounds really obvious, but before we came along, no one had done it because people were pushing solutions that existed on the shelf for a number of years, as opposed to the solutions that we really need to solve the problem. So that's something that we've done and created a new standard with the British Standards Institution as a way to kind of build confidence back in industry and legislators, as I was saying. And the second thing we will do over the next couple of months is get to consumers. There's a real grassroots anxiety out there amongst Generation Z and Y in particular that frankly aren't seeing innovation coming forward quickly enough from business as usual, who are just delivering incrementalism on a lot of these issues at the moment. So by getting to those consumers and empowering them and inspiring them, you can see a lot of great case studies of others who are doing that at the moment, particularly in the plant-based space. I think anyone who wants to learn about how to engage consumers in the right way, particularly Gen Z and Y, should look at the likes of Oatly. I think is a great example of a dairy-based alternative or milk-based alternative, and also Impossible. I think these are great disruptive brands that are getting to consumers first and creating trends to put pressure back on the system to change. And over the next couple of months, we will announce our own strategy and way that we are going to do that over the next couple of years.
Well, it's a fascinating story, and it's so interesting to see now in the whole startup scene that the next generation of companies are purpose-driven from the start. You're starting with nature, you're starting with a problem, and you're working on solving that rather than creating something that you then have to clean up later. So we're big fans of your story, and thanks for sharing that. We'll be back to you in just a bit. Over to you, Henrik.
Okay, thanks, Elaine. Great learnings there again. This turns out to be a great session. And now we will continue with Franny. Just to make a short introduction before I pose your first question to you, Franny. And of course, if we want sustainable sort of transformation to happen, it has to be global. And a lot of the examples we hear about often is about Europe, US. Of course, we need to have the rest of the world with us. And we don't hear that much about it. But I know that you have a great knowledge about Africa, a continent that is close to my heart as well. I lived there for many years, where I know that there is a lot of potential. And in the book that we are writing, Elaine, we're also talking about exponential change and exponential impact. And I know that you're using that word as well, Franny. So turning to you now then, you are focused on achieving exponential impact through the next generation of sustainable technologies with Africa as the platform. Can you tell us a little bit about that? But first maybe about your own leadership focus. And then why you see Africa being the place to achieve exponential impact.
Well, thank you, Hendrik. And I really enjoyed reading the book that you and Elaine have written. And I was particularly struck by the concept of exponential change. And really, because when I look at Africa and I look at the reason why Southbridge was created and its raison d'etre, the focus was on supporting the emergence, the upraising, and the leapfrogging of Africa. Because Africa, to a large extent, is still a green field. We haven't made the mistakes that the rest of the world has made in some areas. And therefore, there's a good opportunity to actually develop completely new ways of doing things, whether it's in the energy field, in the transport field, in the industrial space, even in the household space. And you can already see some of those innovations coming up. So as an individual, I am a signatory as an individual, but also our company of the Principles for Responsible Investing. I am, along with Jeffrey Sachs, on the Leadership Council of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and also make part of the BMW Foundation Responsible Leaders Network. Because through those three networks, we are able to generate ideas, share ideas, and get the kind of exponential and scale change that comes from learning. So I think for me, because we are in Africa and we're able to do this from a greenfield point of view, or from a startup point of view, or from a fast growth point of view, we have the best chance for exponential change.
I like the way that you see that, I mean, that we can do right from the beginning and see that as an opportunity, while I think many investors and I think companies also sometimes they shy away from a market or a region like Africa. Can you give a few examples of sort of success stories of where you have got traction with this thinking?
Yes, so when you look in Africa, our firm has decided to focus on SMEs, because they are 90% of the companies in Africa, to focus on where we can generate impact, particularly in job creation, because without jobs, there cannot be sustainability. And third, to look at the excluded groups. So those tend to be women and people in the rural areas who are normally left out of the economy. So where are there successes when you look across the board in Africa? I'll start with solar energy, because this is the topic that we started with the great descriptions by Nicola on what ENGIE is doing. When you look in Africa at how solar energy has been utilized and the innovations that have come from that, I'll name three because of the impact and the level in which they're having impact. First, on education. A young man in Abidjan came up with the idea that you take these solar strips, the PVC strips, you attach them to backpacks, and the kids wear the backpacks as they walk to school. They charge their mobile devices. They get to school, they download their homework. They walk back home, they charge their devices, and they can do homework at home without electricity. So this is an example where solar energy has been used in a very innovative way, and it's scalable. The second is where a company has come up with a metering technology, smart metering, that can collect energy from multiple solar panels, distribute it to small and medium enterprises and individual households, and you are able to get a profitable business that is running on distributed small-scale solar with smart metering. This has been done in Kenya. And you take another example where now this is at industrial scale, where you have the largest solar park in the world, collecting all the sun during the day and selling the energy to a utility. And this is an example in Morocco. So the beauty of Africa is you can do from the little to the very large, and all of that can move to sustainable solutions. And if you allow me a quick example from the plastics industry, because I really love the company that Neil has created and what they're doing at his company. There's a young woman in Uganda who realized that the frames for glasses are very expensive for the average person in Africa. And she came up with a technology using 3D printing and liquid plastic, where she collects plastic, liquefies it, and using 3D printing prints amazingly designed frames with all sorts of colors and shapes that you can do using 3D printing, and at the same time at an affordable price. And I'm happy to say some of the top fashion houses like Prada and so on are also displaying some of those frames, so they're quite good too.
Okay, great. Fantastic examples there, Franny. I know that maybe a short example also that I know that you have on technology when it comes to COVID-19 and also from Africa. Could you just share that briefly with us?
Indeed, and there's a book that has been published of the 50 top innovations in Africa that came up during the pandemic, and they are quite amazing. They go from using drone technology to distribute medication to very innovative digital techniques for tracing and tracking people who have tested positive, all the way to a solution actually by a young boy, 12-year-old, in Kenya, who came up with, in his own design, a mechanical solution to hand washing where you don't touch the tap. And this can be manufactured in multiple places because you can use your feet to open the tap. And the scaling up challenge, when he was interviewed, how do you take this to scale? He doesn't have enough materials. And the beauty of it, which goes to Neil's company, is he's using recycled plastic containers as the main receptacles and the pieces to actually make his equipment from wood, pieces of iron, and recyclable plastic.
Very good examples, I think, great examples from all three speakers. We are addressing how it changed your company or other companies and whole industry sector. And I think Franny's example here on how you take on the whole world and a continent. So great examples.
Yeah, thanks, Franny. With that, we're just going to pull up the other speakers for a minute and follow up on a few questions and a few thoughts that Jeff raised. And then we'll hear from our next generation challengers that will challenge all of us on the topic of sustainability. But to pick up, really, Jeff talked about, he was very optimistic with opportunities and technological progress. And he talked about, this really being time to accelerate action. And of course, we have these great examples here today, but I would just like to open the question up to see, do you think that and I say we, meaning the broader private sector, are we engaging governments enough? Are we engaging governments right? We have this major climate summit taking place this week. In your views, in the different industries you're representing, do you think that we should be engaging governments differently at this point in time? I think back, Neil, when you talked about the climate event in Copenhagen, I was also there, 2009, and at that time, and in many of these big events like the climate summits, the businesses are kind of seen like, okay, you can come in and sponsor the event, but you're not really part of the dialogue. So there still is kind of these two, in my view, parallel conversations that are going on. So I just want to hear your views on what is it that the private sector could do differently in order to, open up or engage better. Jeff touched on it. Let's hear your views. Maybe, Neil, you want to start?
Yeah, very, very happy to. I mean, the best way to think about this as a metaphor, and it's not just for government, but any business that wants to be kind of purpose-driven, you got to get used to this whole concept of breaking the walls of the business down so that you can, much more effectively bring the world with you. And it's a complete reverse of the big corporate affairs departments, Elaine, that you and I used to have in Ericsson and BT, which were kind of designed to keep the world back, to engage stakeholders in a kind of a formulaic but kind of quite static way. And the trend very much amongst more disruptive businesses is to completely flip that on its head. NGOs, government, academics, bring them into your innovation, bring them into your product engine, have them co-create the solutions together with you, because they're much more able to inform your science, your innovation, your plans for policy change and advocacy by kind of working together with you, going to them as a last resort, which is typically what business as usual does, on these big global issues is certainly not the way forward. So on what we did about that, when we were developing the standard with the British Standards Institution, we invited in government officials, not that they were technical and able to add to the technical debate, but just so when government were developing all the different policy positions on plastic specifically, they'd actually been at the table. And there was, that sense of, I think, a balanced perspective and balanced debate, because you get, as government, lobbied all the time on, I have got a silver bullet, I've got, the solution for you. And it's much better to be authentic and to say, well, look, this is part of the solution. This is the data that supports it, and have them be party to the change. And I think that can be a very different mindset as a business to get your head around, is having them sit at the table with you when you're developing innovation. And the same is true at the other side of things as well. At COP in Copenhagen, Elaine, you'll remember that the business summit was run completely independently to government. It was almost like a sideshow. Business weren't at the table. So I think we really have to bring business and government together at these big conferences, and I think that's happening more and more now, but in a meaningful way, not as a kind of as a show. It has to actually inform innovation and help shape the debate.
Great, and I think that what you're talking about, what I would maybe loosely refer to as stakeholder engagement, like 2.0. You're saying break the old formulas, make it more real. We've written a whole chapter about this in our book. We call it a societal ecosystem, which is very much based on what you're saying, where you're leaning on nature and you're leaning on society in order to help you understand your impact on them, whereas the traditional stakeholder engagement, you're just asking people, well, what do you think about us? So it's really turning it on its head, and I think we would agree that's the future. But Nicholas, would you like to add a few comments there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a couple dimensions to keep in mind here. One is that the relationship between companies and governments has multiple different forums where it takes place. There's very active on the local front, national front, within Europe at the European level front, and the multilateral, of course, such as the COPs and so on. So there are multiple areas to go and really engage with governments. And companies are typically, especially nowadays in the energy sector, for example, which is an area which we focus on, really engaged at all these levels. And I think when you have a really sound engagement approach, you need to think about these multiple levels. Another important thing to keep in mind, and I think this joins what Neil was saying, was that really, when you look at and I'm taking the climate dimension here, if you look at the costs of climate mitigation technologies, they've gone down radically over the last couple decades. And so that really changes the nature of the engagement. We're now indeed interacting with governments and regulators almost as partners, because we're really at costs which are starting to become in the ballpark of what's doable. It certainly has happened to be the case for renewables, absolutely for energy efficiency, where there are other barriers, but increasingly so for other hard to abate sectors that Jeff was mentioning, such as around green thermal and things like that. So as soon as you start compressing these costs, you're starting to have a very different interaction with regulators and governments.
Thanks. And Franny, I'd like to have your reflection here too, and then I'll hand back to Henrik for the next part of the agenda.
Well, thanks, Elaine, for that question. I think I'll come back to what Jeff said earlier, that the future is green and it's digital, and give some examples of why we need government to work with corporations in order to solve the problem. If you take the payment systems in Africa, which really allowed even the people who didn't have bank accounts to be able to use mobile technology to buy and sell things and to do their savings. That revolution took place because you had the central banks involved, you had the ministries of finance, the tax authorities, and of course the technology ministry that laid the groundwork that allowed that kind of transformation to take place. Another very quick one is with COVID, many African countries that were dependent on tourism for their export revenues have found themselves in a lot of difficulty. And they've come up with innovations, again, working with government to digitalize the safari. So now you can sit in your living room in Europe, in North America or Asia, and participate as if you were physically there because of that amazing technology that they had to get airspace regulations lifted so they could film the animals as they migrate and come very close to give you that living room experience. And then the last one is an example, I don't know if Henrik would remember this, with Scania. This is in my previous capacity where we had a challenge of road safety in Scania, where a lot of the accidents were happening on the road, and because the very heavily trafficked roads had trucks going by them, that was the first area to say, if you want to improve road safety, you have to start with the trucks. So Scania offered to do this truck drivers training program for safety, and they trained all their drivers, but of course the statistics didn't improve. And it turned out it's because if your drivers are behaving and everyone else is not, you don't solve the problem. You have to solve the whole ecosystem problem. And at that stage, Scania then offered safety training for all drivers, regardless of whether you work for them or not. And that improved the situation for everybody. So here's an example again where city governments, national governments working with the private sector can generate benefits that are good for the company itself, but in this case, they have benefits for the whole ecosystem.
Fantastic examples.
No, great examples. And I think, Elena, as we mention in the book as well, I think one learning from our both work is that sometimes it also makes sense that if you belong to one industry, that you start thinking a little bit broader and think of yourself belonging to an ecosystem, which brings in, I think, other industries that are related to you. Because at least my own experience is if you try to drive policy changes in your industry association, it becomes a club for the smallest common denominator and you get absolutely nothing done. So it's better than to try to team up with a value chain approach with other industries, your customer's customer and your suppliers. And if you come and present the whole chain of change to the policymakers, they tend to listen much more. So then you get more credibility. I think that is one of the things we talk about there. Great input, and we will hear more about that in a few minutes as well. But now it's time for the next generation challengers, and we are very excited here to have Efwa and also Aubrey with us, and I will soon introduce them. But first, if you have questions to us here on now, then it's a good time to send it in so that we can try to address them in the Q&A session later on. But now, a special welcome then to Efwa and Aubrey that are on screen, as you can see. And Efwa is an MBA candidate at the Imperial College Business School in London. And Aubrey just completed his MBA at INSEAD in the Singapore campus. So welcome to both of you. Great to have you here. If I start with you, Efwa, would you please lead us off with your question to our speakers?
Hi, thank you very much for having me. It's been a really, really insightful talk so far. So thanks a lot. In the spirit of being a challenger, I want to talk to Niall. Want to talk about technology. So we've been really optimistic about technological solutions for achieving sustainability. With issues around scalability and capital mobilization, I'd like to put, I guess, technology against nature-based solutions. And maybe you could talk a little bit about the efficacy of one over the other and ways in which maybe you see them working in synergy.
Yeah, it's a great question, Efwa. And one person that I think has done, incredible thinking on this over the years is actually Prince Charles, with the book that he published with Tony Juniper a couple of years ago called Harmony. And it shows that actually you don't have to have an either or. Your best technical solutions, if it's informed by nature. So if you spend time trying to understand the natural cycles of nature herself, And as you design the, I'm going to deliberately say man-made, because there is an element of us not being empathetic enough with the natural environment. You ultimately come up against the boundaries of nature. So when we developed our biotransformation technology, if we just used, I mean, you're in Imperial, you'll know how the Imperial Molecular Science division is world leading. But it still wasn't enough on its own to develop our technology. We had to bring biology into the equation to understand the natural agents of decay, to make sure that we very much went with the grain of what Mother Earth was trying to do. It's interesting to see that, you know, one of the other philosophies out there is that recycling, you know, which would be a technical solution, can address this issue all on its own. Whereas from the get-go, our view was actually everything needs to return to nature sooner or later anyway. So in developing this technology, we should design so that when that needs to happen, it goes seamlessly, it goes well, but we give the human-made technical cycle every chance to happen. So it was really those combined philosophies that you know, allowed us to develop something that is much more scalable, much more easy to democratize, and also goes with, you know, what Mother Nature would want us to do anyway. And it was all of those things was the reason why, you know, Prince Charles, you know, 18 months ago came to visit our laboratories, because he was intrigued by, you know, the work that we were doing.
Efwa, I think you had another question as well, didn't you?
Yeah, actually, one for you, Henrik. Again, in the spirit of being a challenger, you talked a little bit about improved stakeholder engagement, or stakeholder engagement 2.0. If we think about government, businesses, and individuals as three key stakeholders, where do you think the responsibility split should be when it comes to trying to achieve sustainability, and why?
Maybe a little bit philosophical, but I think it's each individual's responsibility to take their turn and see it as. I mean, now it's our generation's time to look after this planet and keep the campfire going in a positive way and leave a better planet behind for the next generation. So I think it's up to each individual. But I think also that corporate leaders and if I remember correctly, I think it is out of the 100 biggest entities in the world, which includes then countries as well, 69 of them, the top 100 is companies. So of course, if we want to create change, I think that companies have to step up. But it's also that we need to make sure that I think, like Neil was into as well, and that we need to work in partnership with the policymakers and with society. It cannot be sort of like we and them, or that we try to figure something out and then present it and then ask for permission. It has to be done in symbiosis. So I think this partnership between science, policymakers, the public, and companies, I think then you get things done. But at the end of the day, it's everyone's responsibility, in my view.
I think Aubrey has a couple of questions as well. You there, Aubrey?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks for having me as well. So my first question would be to you, Franny. So something you obviously know too well, and what I also witnessed whilst living in Kenya, is that there really is so much the world can learn from initiatives on the African continent relating to sustainability, you know, innovations, processes, and how to scale these up. And you obviously mentioned quite a few good examples. So my challenge to you is really, how do we get the rest of the world to take a closer, serious look at the innovations being developed on the African continent, and how do we get this learning to actually take place?
Thank you, Aubrey, for that question. I think there are three ways in which the innovations from Africa can make it to the global scene. And it's already happening. So all that I'm saying is already taking place, and it's a question of scaling up. So the first one is, how do we pay for all of this? We've been talking about innovations, but how do they get financed? Because without financing, we can't get to scale, and without scale, nobody knows about what you're doing. And here I have the example of Kigali. The country has decided that Kigali is going to be a sustainable investing space, and therefore everyone who comes into that ecosystem, whether you are an investor, a trader, a company, the focus is going to be on sustainability. So that means that there'll be a concentration of global and African entities, investors, service providers, and companies that are all focused on sustainability, and that's going to get people to wake up. The second is to actually collect and tell those stories. And you would have seen a number of examples with the work that Marcus is doing in Africa, collecting innovations and having podcasts to talk about them and publicizing them. The work Ahuna has done at the UN that does the same. And then the last one, I believe, is in these areas where large companies from outside Africa are investing in Africa. They are uncovering innovations, or they are using the opportunity to innovate. And then how they take those examples to the rest of the world is another channel by which these examples can make it to outside Africa.
Great. Thank you, Franny. And I'll jump then to my second question, which I had planned for you, Nicholas. So you mentioned that you provide these advisory services, the digital tools and road mapping of ideas to help many corporates on their sustainability and decarbonization journeys. However, in my own personal experience of conducting similar work, more often than not, these kind of ideas stay on paper and they never really make it to implementation. So could you share with us what are some of the challenges that typically hold back companies from implementing these ideas that NG Impact identifies? And what could the solutions be? How do we really improve this situation?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it's also why companies such as NG Impact are unique, because we don't stop at the advice. We're ready to take on the implementation and commitments with our clients. So oftentimes you might provide a good recommendation, but it might not have the capabilities or the financial means to do it. So in order to really in the spirit of partnership, companies which have that capabilities be able to actually say, well, not only this is the right path, but we're ready to put money and commitments where we're based on the advice that we just shared, and so jointly basically go down that path together. So really, for me, it's around capabilities and oftentimes financing, which are two really critical bottlenecks. Capabilities, because a lot of these companies just don't have that inherent capabilities around these core sustainability topics. They had it maybe enough to get to a certain level, but when you have to go to deep reductions, you really need to have in-house really elaborate capabilities, which typically they don't have. And financing for good reasons. Companies typically like to spend their capital on things which will help grow and expand the business. So investing oftentimes costly into costly energy or decarbonization or other sustainability assets is not core business. So finding a partnership where you have companies which are willing to partner in order to say, you know what, that is my core business. So let us partner with you to take that on. You focus on your business. We'll take on a business model where everybody finds his own feet. I think is a really novel way to go about these challenges, and one which we're increasingly developing with our clients.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Great. So we have time now to take a few audience questions. Henrik and I have iPads here, and we're tracking the questions as they come in. So we'll open it up right now to the broader audience. And I have a first question for Neil, and it's a pretty basic question, but I think everybody should learn whatever answer you're going to give us for this one. It is taking the plastic garbage out of the ocean useful?
Yeah, it's useful. The question is, what do you do with it then? So it's important to emphasize that it's a very diverse set of materials. So it's everything from fishing nets through to more flexible types of packaging applications, and it's also been building up in the oceans for decades. So mostly what you need to do with that type of material is what's called downcycling it. So take all of those materials, stabilize them very heavily, and if it has sufficient quality, it can become something like lumber, as in plastic lumber, infrastructure, those types of materials. So, downcycling is certainly something we can do with ocean plastic, but it's important to emphasize that's only giving it a second life. It's not really truly circular. It's kind of like a posh landfill almost. It can't really go on to become anything else after that. So yes, it is useful. I would say if you also need to look at solving the upstream problem. All the experts say if we want to solve oceans plastic, the most important thing we can do is turn off the taps. So that's about reduction. It's about redesigning the materials. So if they do wind up in nature, they will biodegrade effectively, and it's also about recycling.
Okay, good question, a good answer on a good question. So the next one that come up here is to Franny, and I think it goes back to some of the things you touched upon in your remark. How does varying internet access services, affordability and infrastructure affect the pace of sustainable solutions? I assume it's more linked to sort of like the continent of Africa then, and so
I think one of the features of African innovation is that a lot of the digital innovation that took place outside of the internet, right, on mobile telephones and other platforms. And I think there is indeed still a big gap in terms of internet access. So that is an issue, because when you come to data and analytics and other more complex data science applications, you do need sometimes to move beyond mobile networks and then into the internet, and using web-based solutions also for that. But Africa has proven that you can do it even without internet access. It's very critical, however, to have electricity. So energy is a huge problem that needs to be resolved, because you still need to charge those devices. And the innovations that Nicola talked about, I think, are very important. And secondly, you do need to integrate those various data systems, and Africa has shown that you can do that in these large cities, which many of them are now becoming data centers. I was very excited to hear that Twitter has selected Accra to be its headquarters for Africa. So that's going to link up not only to the Secretariat for Regional Integration, which is in Accra, but also to some of the great innovations happening in the fintech space in the whole West Africa region, and linking up to the rest of Africa. So I think infrastructure is important, particularly energy and spreading the IT backbone, but you can also innovate without it, as mobile payment systems have shown.
Henrik, I have a question that I see has come for you here.
Okay.
And that's, you transformed Scania, and now you're moving on to transform a new industry still. What is your approach going to be? We all want to know.
Yeah, it is correct that I'm leaving, sadly, after many years, Scania, 23 years, but of course it is a fantastic journey we have done at Scania, and it will continue, because we have been able to build sustainability into the core. It's our purpose. It is linked to our values in the company, our core values that are with us for a long time. So I feel that we have 50,000 people with us. So it's okay now to do something else. And I think the next challenging industry, another one hard to abate, is of course steel production. I have wanted to buy, talking about sort of upstream, scope free before, I wanted to buy fossil free steel. A truck is 6 tons of steel. or roughly, and I would like to buy that, and there hasn't really been a good alternative. So now I think it's time to try to jump into that, but with a startup approach, very much similar to what Neil is explaining, that trying to sort of start and build a company, a sustainable play from scratch using digitalization. So basically not building a steel company, but rather building a tech company that just happens to produce steel. So more about that later on, but thanks for the question anyway. But I would like to come back to Franny again, and I think there was another question that I had picked up here as well, and that is that we don't talk so much about the bioeconomy. Of course, the bioeconomy is also something that is a booster of growth, and it could also, if it's done in a sustainable way, be something that create high-skilled jobs, low-skilled jobs. So it's not only environmental, but also socially sort of linked to it. And I think this question comes linked to that. I mean, is the bioeconomy a engine that can be used to sort of also create sustainable growth in Africa, Franny?
Absolutely. In fact, for Africa to have a green revolution with all the challenges of climate change, including drought and floods, but the bioeconomy is absolutely fundamental. It also has an impact in medicine. Biomedicine is one of the rich growing areas that the bioeconomy can contribute to, but also energy. I was very impressed by a very simple cooking technology that uses solar and twigs. So if you look at sustainable forestry, having a bioeconomy that is based on harvesting the extremely diverse fauna that Africa has, working with different soil types and weather conditions to innovate in food production. I think Neil is the one who mentioned Impossible Foods as one of the examples. So Africa really is the basket of the world for food, and could be the innovation space to come up with all kinds of plant-based solutions, insect-based solutions. So the bioeconomy is absolutely critical at the high end of innovation to the very basic day-to-day. I always say that we can go from nanotechnology all the way to biotechnology within a very small square meter of earth advantage at all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Franny.
So
we're coming to the end of...
coming to the end.
Yeah. So if we start with concluding this session, then thank you very much for all the great questions came in. We will try to answer the ones that we haven't managed to take here now live. But as a conclusion of this great sessions that we have had here, Elaine, I think we would like to ask all the speakers, all of you, if you can give one piece of advice for someone who is starting their sustainability journey in 30 to 60 seconds, what would that be? So if we start with you, Nicholas, please.
Thank you very much. I think my advice would be to keep it very pragmatic. A lot of these sustainability challenges are actually not so complicated conceptually. And so the more you can keep it very pragmatic around very concrete solutions and action-oriented, so to make progress one step at a time, I think that's really the main focus and advice that I would give to the next generation of sustainability leaders.
Yeah, that's been your recipe for success.
I've tried to indeed always remain close to business to some extent, and really help as much as possible keep things very simple and concrete and achievable for both my clients as well as my own company.
Okay, great, thanks. So if we go over to Franny.
I will use the African proverb that says, hope does not disappoint. And that's because if you are optimistic and you try and keep trying, knowing that you'll bump into the solution, I think that's really the trick to sustainability and to exponential growth. So hope does not disappoint, never disappoints.
Okay, good. That's a good one. We'll remember that one. Neil, what would be your advice with your broad experience?
Two things. Don't compromise on your integrity. Back your values and your beliefs, no matter what the world tells you. Second thing is obsess about building networks. And just a funny, really quick story on that. When I started off on this journey and was trying to set up the sustainability practice in Accenture, somebody gave me Jeff Sachs's book, Commonwealth, to read. And I read it like it was the Bible. I think I read it 5 or 6 times. And then Jeff was in Dublin with Kofi and Anne. And I actually found out he was staying in the Merrion Hotel. And I went in and I stalked Jeff Sachs. I hung out in the lobby trying to bump into him. I told Jeff this story many years later, and him and his wife, Sonia, laughed about it, that I would go to such lengths to try and get an audience with him. But for anyone else out there trying to, figure out what to do, just build networks, listen to your networks and try and really filter out misinformation and look at what different people can teach you, and don't be scared about finding mentors that will help guide you on this journey.
Okay, great, thanks. Aubrey, then the next generation challenges. What's your advice?
Okay, so keeping in line with my challenger role, our societies and many businesses are currently focusing on developing new technologies and innovations to meet the challenge of climate change and allow our arguably quite decadent lifestyles to continue without restraint. So although I think this techno-optimism is welcome, I would also argue we can't escape the fact that we all need to consider what personal compromises or changes we will make in our own lives if we really want to be truly genuine about our public commitment to sustainability.
Okay, thanks. And the last word to you then, Efwa, what's your advice?
I think I would echo Aubrey, really, that it's very easy to get overwhelmed in this space. There's a lot of challenges. We don't have answers to everything. It's really important to understand where your boundaries are and know how far you're willing to go for. Make sure you remain in, your integrity remains intact. And I'd say it's really important also to spread the word. Make people understand exactly what it is, how important sustainability is, and hopefully they can follow in your footsteps.
Okay, thank you. Great words from great leaders.
And spreading the word, we are spreading the word with our book. So if anyone in the audience hasn't got it, you can get that on our publisher's website, paulgrave.com, and many other places where you buy books. So, Henrik?
I think with that, we are 1 minute over time, more or less. A big thank you to all our great speakers. Thank you very much for your great wisdom and your willingness to share your knowledge and experience. And thanks to all you viewing as well. And take that knowledge on and spread it on to other people. And then this movement and this transformation that we talk about will accelerate even further. And that's what we want.
And have a great Earth Day week for everyone celebrating that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.